Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How's it going? Screezilla here, and I hope you're well. And you join me in a post-event world with a new economy change in the game. Strategically, this was a good move by Gaijin. It was a move that they needed to do, this economy change, because the community has grown rather disenchanted with the game, I should say. Much of the community are feeling the burn after this last event, and post-event burnout is definitely a thing that we will see happening. With that post-event burnout, what that's going to be is just slightly lower player numbers, things like that. But another thing this event has done is brought to question a lot of people's faith in the game. I'm hearing a lot of people say that they're feeling like Gaijin are just being shills, they're just trying to sell what they can, and they're trying to force you to make purchases, and that's not what people enjoy. People are feeling the game has moved away from its historical gameplay elements and more into this spend money, make money, do all this stuff kind of world. And this isn't necessarily a good thing, because people are going to start walking away from the game. I already know about 4 or 5 people I speak to regularly who actually are considering leaving the game, and they are pretty diehard fans. Hearing that from them is quite a big thing, and it's quite a telling thing as well, because a lot of people are feeling very, very shaken by this event and feeling very burnt out. But the event is over, and we do continue, and continue indeed we do. With the event changes came the economy changes, and there has been some big movers and shakers. Rank 5 and 6 is where the economy change happens. I do feel this is a little bit naive, because it does feel like the whole tech tree needed a bit of a look at for certain things, but at least it's a start. Let us hope that Gaijin continue with this and actually make the grind a little smoother for everybody and a little less grindy. But ranks 5 and 6 have been just a stopping point for a lot of people. Many people have been unable to get past that. But one of the problems we face now is with rank 5 and 6, certain nations have certain vehicles in there. Now, Italy, for example, has come out quite well, because 5 and 6, you've got a lot of 5 and 6. Rank 5 vehicles in there. It's helped with certain crews and certain vehicles. But when you look at places like Germany, who have ranks 5, 6 and 7, the changes in these last 2 ranks, really, not the sort of earlier ranks. And this doesn't really help with the grind that much, because there's still a huge amount of experience needed for these vehicles. So ranks 6 and 7 are the ones that have had the main sort of change in their grinding, and that is a good thing. So now the top tier vehicles are 390 research points. But as I said, I think I needed to look at rank 5 as well, because when you think about it, the grind in rank 5, in ranks 4, Roman numerals, I hate them. The grind in rank 4, you're looking at about 60,000 RP. Then you jump up to rank 5, and you're looking at 170,000 research points. And these vehicles are very much not worth it anymore. The Ravington Jagdpanzer, yeah, that kind of is, but the Mouse, for example, is a vehicle that faces post-war vehicles with Heat FS and APFSDS shells. It's obsolete. The M48A2 is not bad, but it's a tank going up against late Cold War vehicles and helicopters. these tanks here are the area they needed to also look at. And the same can be said for aviation, because although we only have 5 and 6 in aviation, they have actually done some in this regard. So, you know, they have changed it a bit, made it a bit easier for the aviation grind, because there's no 7th rank. Sorry, I just have to double check my Roman numerals. I'm terribly sorry about that. But there's not that extra rank that needs to be done. So, you know, in aviation, yes, the cost for a lot of jets has gone down. So things like the Horton, even the MiG-15 BIS has gone down a bit. The ME-262 A1U4, things like that. So they're now a bit more affordable, which makes absolute sense. But you will have noticed on my title card today that we now have a new most expensive vehicle in game. I don't mean that in actual cost of the initial buying price. I mean that in the general running. Now, the M1 Abrams series have been considered very ill-advised vehicles to use for money grinding, but they've had a change in their costing and a change for ammunition costing, which makes them a little bit easier to run. And the same is for Japan with the Type 90, which is a vehicle I technically can't grind out for, even though I own it. Gaijin logic, because they added the Type 89 in there, and now you need 3 vehicles instead of 2 to get the Type 90. Oh gosh, that always you wonder. But they've reduced the cost of the shells, so they're still a bit expensive at 610 lines a shot, but the price has gone down. The price has also gone down on the equipment on the tank. So for bits and pieces, it's now cheaper to get those bits and pieces. But I did tell you we are looking at the most expensive vehicle in game. We're going to have to head for Germany for this one. And no, it's not the Leopard 2A5. Not at all. You could head to Russia, and you'd think, maybe not a tank. Maybe an anti-aircraft vehicle. No, it's still not there. It's in the aviation tree. Well, the good old TU4, with its 31,000 line repair cost, that's a good bet. And then you've got the B29, sorry, B29, God, yeah, sorry, it's late if you can't tell. The B29, with its 31,000 line repair cost, at least for me. It's still an expensive plane though. You've got the Lancasters and you've got the Sterlings. Sorry, the Lancasters and the Lincolns. And the Lincoln is an expensive plane to run, 31,000 lines. It's hideously expensive compared to that of the Lancasters. With Japan, for instance, you've got the G8N1, which again is a ridiculously expensive plane to run at almost 30,000 lines. Italy does not really get this problem. The P108 is still quite expensive for its BR of 7,000 lions, and if we look at fighters, you know, it's not that bad because, you know, sort of at that sort of 3.7 BR, you're just going to have to look around about that 4 to 5,000 lion mark. Once you start getting the BF109s and the later planes, they start to come up in price. And as you can see, the G56 has come up in price a fair bit at 27,000 lions repair cost now. A lot of these planes have gone down in cost, but they've gone up in repair cost for balancing purposes. And this is where a problem can lie, because when you start balancing your vehicles by making the repair costs higher, the G55 series, for instance, 8,000 lions, 18,000 lions at rank 3. The premium, however, is still only 9,000 lions. But when you start balancing vehicles with cost like this, it sends them into a tailspin, and you can no longer use those vehicles. You may be thinking about the Mitsubishi T2. Well, yes, it's certainly expensive at 21,000 lions, but not super expensive. 21,000 lines is a fair chunk of money, and you're generally going to get killed every couple of missions. So you're going to end up losing money on these vehicles. But no, we're still not there. We're going to go back to Germany for this one. And no, it's not the CL13 or the MiG-19S. It is, of course, the HE-177, with a repair cost of 41,000 lions. It's taken over the mantlet of the most expensive vehicle in game to run. Now, I just wish to slide it over to the JE-288 here, which is 8,000 lions. Now, these planes almost have a similar bomb load. The HE-177 carries 1,000 pounds more of explosives. Sorry, not 1,000. 3,000 pounds more. 3,000 kilograms more explosives. So my brain is absolutely fried. But other than that, this is faster, it's smaller, more agile. This is bigger, less agile, and of course not a premium. And so it's been given 41,000 lions as a penalty for being too good to the game. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump in a match, hopefully, and we'll see if it comes out with us making any money, because that will be a really interesting thing to see. Now, this was my favourite grinding plane for a long time, until I got the JU-288. The HE-177 is a brilliant plane, and it was terribly flawed. There was a 4-engine version of this plane. Well, it's a 4-engine version as it is, but 4 individual engines of this plane, and it was being a superb long-distance bomber. However, some crazy bloke at the top of the government at the time decided that no, this plane needed to be a dive bomber. It should only have 2 engines. It should be faster, more agile. It shouldn't have this, it should have this. And what you ended up with was the HE-177, which is possibly one of the worst planes in the history of aviation, and that is a pretty big thing to gain, because there's been some terrible planes in the history of aviation. I wouldn't put it up in the top 20 though. I mean, it's not a top 20 contend, but it's in the top 100 for sure. This plane would just catch on fire. The landing gear would break a lot. It would catch on fire a lot. And the landing gear would break a lot. It was generally a very, very dangerous plane to be in. It wasn't very successful, needless to say. And I suppose that's a good thing, because if it was successful, then, well, the aviation companies of Great Britain would have suffered. And the American shore would have suffered. The world would have suffered, you know. This thing could have been a real game changer. But thanks to one lunatic, it wasn't. And it remained a very flawed aircraft. The reason it remained flawed is because of the engine configuration. See? There we go. The engine configuration, which, as you can see, are 2 Daimler DB... I'm thinking DB6 or 9. I can never remember the actual proper name. But they're basically 2 Daimler V12s strapped together to make one engine. And that's never a good idea, because it causes a lot of problems. And as you can see, they've actually been mounted somewhat upside down. And there was a lot of problems with this plane, and a lot of problems getting it to work. However, the engineers did get it to work. It was working. Not very well, as I said, it would catch fire, but it was working. it's just a very flawed concept, as I said. But in game, it's a good plane, because you don't have to worry about technical issues. You don't have to worry about problems like that. You don't have to worry about the issue of overheating engines as much, because generally, when they overheat, you just ease off the throttle and it's fine. You don't have to worry about the engines failing on you constantly. You don't have to worry about your wings falling off. You don't have to worry about the plane spontaneously combusting, because these are things that don't happen in War Thunder, because you don't really have failure. You don't really have plane failures, and that's both a good and a bad thing. I mean, it would be interesting to have that additional part to the game where parts of your plane could fail on you if you're using it a bit rough, for instance. But it would add an element of the game which kind of would make it a bit unfair, because it's very much in that sort of RNG land, which Gaijin are not too unhappy in visiting, of course, as we saw with the last event. But balancing a vehicle on cost of use alone is not the way to balance a vehicle. The way to balance a vehicle is to make it balanced from the start. And this is the issue with Gaijin, is they don't make their vehicles balanced. They don't make their vehicles easy to sort of capable of having that balance. You know, there's no counter for some vehicles. Much like the Russian anti-air vehicle. At the moment, that is the counter for planes and helicopters. But only one country has it. And yet, we have a few countries that have helicopters. They brought out helicopters before a countermeasure was actually even implemented. They brought out ATGMs before a countermeasure was implemented. That's not how you work a game. You bring in the countermeasure first, and then you use the vehicles that were there to be countermeasured in the first place. It's been a problem since I started playing War Thunder back in the 2016 era. It's been a problem that has been a constant, and it's never really stopped. It's never really gone away. It's never really ceased being a problem. And I've always been a bomber pilot. All through War Thunder, my favourite thing to do is to fly bombers. I love this. This for me is the perfect gameplay, because what I do with this is I catch up on TV shows, I watch things, I read things, I glance through history stuff to work on my next video, I write the text for my next video as I'm flying along. But at the same time, I get a feeling of accomplishment, and I get a feeling of joy, because I love bombers. Bombers are terrible vehicles. Bombers are vehicles that kill without any reprise. They will murder a civilian, they will murder anyone. But you'll never know who you've killed, because you don't see the effects of a bomber. In history, they are terrible vehicles that brought mass destruction to civilians. But in a game, they're just kind of fun, because who doesn't love dropping thousands of tons of ordnance on something? Like an airfield. It's just a beautiful feeling. And when you're playing the game, when you're dropping bombs, when you're doing that kind of thing, it's a really cool feeling. And when you survive a flight, or survive a fight with the enemy, it's a really good feeling. When you've got a fighter on your 6, and you're having to dodge, bob and weave, and you get the bomber back, beaten to crap, with half its wing gone, it's such a feeling of achievement. It's just one of those things that's hard to explain. For me, it's one of the best things about War Thunder. It's that game that has joy for it, and that's the thing that brings me joy. But unfortunately, with the Gaijin balancing system, aka what they've done with the HE-177, which was a vehicle that was extremely powerful with its bomb load, they've nerfed it because it's too powerful and it's making people too much money. But they can't nerf the JU-288. Well, they can, of course, they can do other things to nerf it, but they can't really nerf the repair cost or the price of it. So what you end up with is a premium plane being the only plane you can sensibly use to play as a bomber. And what that means is you have no regular tech tree planes that can be used in that role. And the planes that you can use in that role that are pretty much equal to it, i.e. the HE-177, become obsolete because nobody can afford to run them. Nobody can actually afford to really run this plane unless you've got millions and millions of lines sitting in the bank. You're not doing anything with them, just playing for fun. You could probably play this plane for a bit. But without that opportunity, you can't really do much. And right there, we've got our tail ripped off by the Spitfire. Try and get some hits on board. Unfortunately, we can't. We're going to stall. Going down. And that is game over for me. Let's say Call of Duty, for instance. Let's look at one of those games. Let's say they balanced the guns. So, for an assault rifle, every bullet costs you 1 coin. I don't know what currency to use. 1 coin, right? So, for an assault rifle, they could be quite expensive. For a heavy machine gun, they become extremely expensive. So you use them less. You have problems with it. Well, what Gaijin has done with this is basically made a game that is just impossible to play for some vehicles. Look at the B-29, for instance. It's a vehicle that is impossible to play. It would be impossible to play that class because it would simply be too expensive. And I will give it to what was his name again? Phantom Mops. He did kind of redeem himself at the end there, but as I said, he could have, in all honesty, helped save a couple of planes and make it a bit easier. But we'll look at the reward here. So our reward is 59,000 lines. Really good reward there. But if we had a repair cost, which I'm pretty sure we did, because yeah, I'm trying to work it out now. I'm trying to actually do the workout. With our repair cost and things like that, those lines go down. So you sort of end up losing money, and you end up sort of breaking even or losing money on these games. So we made a bit of money, but if we play this again and we get shot down again, we're losing money. And if that was a loss, we would be on an awful lot of a loss of money. We got some good research points as well, just to be said. But again, as I said, the sorry, I'm just having a bit of thinker. Yeah, less research than it could be. Anyway, but as I say, the way they do these vehicles to make them basically unplayable is just not fair, and it's just not how you should make a game. You shouldn't be basing a game on the economy and making it so a vehicle such as this can't be used. You could use it every 13 days, but that's it. And it forces you to go to the premium of the JU288, which gives you better rewards. You may have less payload, but you get a much better reward from it. It's a much cheaper repair cost. It is just bonkers, and it makes no sense whatsoever. And as I said, with some of the planes as well, we look at the BF-109 K4 here, for instance, $13,000 repair cost. The TAR 152, $26,000 line repair cost. Sorry, I was saying dollars. 28,000 line repair cost. And then we look at things that are a bit lower. Now these are the same BR. These should be the same repair cost, but they're not, because the TAR 152 is a much more effective plane, and therefore Gaijin don't want you playing it. The DOs, the DO 335s, now the actual non-premium versions are not that good, but the premium one is actually a very, very good plane. I think it's this one. Yeah. With this one you still get some bomb load, and that's quite handy, and it does make it a very, very useful plane. But they just sort of, they balance the planes by how well they're performing. So if a plane underperforms for a while, it gets a lower repair cost. But if it overperforms, it gets a higher repair cost. It shouldn't be like that. It should just stay what it is forever. You shouldn't have to be balancing vehicles with repair costs. And I can guarantee you that people who are flying the G8N1 constantly are not having great games. They're not having fantastic matches. They're not shooting down hundreds of planes. But you've got planes like the... where am I going? Like the J7W1, which does have quite a good sort of battle rating. And again, it gets up in their repair cost. It costs more to repair this than it does the jet. And again, that makes no sense. There's no real logic to it. Now, luckily, they have reduced the repair costs for a lot of ground vehicles, and that's going to make things a lot better for ground forces players. It's going to make things a bit easier to handle. But the fact that they do it to the aircraft is just an absolute joke. And when you look at some vehicles, again, if we look at the Ariete, which is not really on the level of the Type 90, for instance. Now, of course, this can be down to a bit of crew, things like that, because, of course, I've got it and I've got some extra components. But 10,000 maximum repair cost versus 11,000. Why is that? How does that work? Again, obviously I don't have it, so there are factors that can change it, I know. But it just sometimes makes no sense. There's very little sense in the way they make repair costs. The Challenger 2 is 5,000 lions. Yet the Challenger 1 Mark III, the Challenger 1, 7,000 lines. It just, there is no sense to be made in these sort of repair costs, and it is that thing of balancing. And if we go to naval, for instance, naval was trying to do it quite a lot with cruisers, and it got to a stage where cruisers were unplayable because they cost too much. They simply cost too much money. And it's still kind of at that case, is you lose money when you're playing a cruiser, simply because, say, with if we just look at HMS Tiger here, the shell cost, so the 6-inch shell cost. This is the thing. That's not a good example. Sorry. We'll go to the column. If we look at the column, so the standard shells, of course, are free, but they're not quite as good as some of the next shells up, and some of the AP shells, for instance. And 50 lines is not a huge amount, but when you're firing, 300-400 of these shells a game, it really does add up quickly. And of course you've got your secondary guns, which of course you can have just the standard HE, but you need the flak rounds. And it all builds up in cost, and it makes it get to a crazy stage where you end up losing money every match rather than gaining it, even on a win. A while back when the cruisers were sort of first coming out, before the Köln, before the Nuremberg, back when the Emden was the thing, I would play games, and you can see actually with the Emden, it's quite a good example. The German cruiser line with the maximum repair cost of 14 to 13,000 lines, whereas if we look at the British repair costs, 4,000 lines, 4,000 lines, 4,000 lines. The Americans, 3,000 lines, 3,000 lines, and quite possibly one of the best cruisers in game is only 4,000 lines. If we go to Russia and look at the Kirov, 6,000 lines. The Kirov and the Brooklyn are 10 times better than the Nuremberg, the Köln and the Emden, yet these cruisers all have a huger repair cost because of balancing issues, because of the fact they've been around longer and they have a higher number of kills than those other cruisers. But that's their idea of balancing. If we look at the Kravkas, again, very high repair cost, again, very high repair cost, but then low repair cost, because these cruisers have been out for a bit of time, yet this one hasn't. I believe some of the destroyers as well, they have some ridiculous repair costs of